So here we are backstage. That was a good start to the conversation. Thoughts that our conversation raised that we didn't have time to address.
So many.
I had a thought, but I didn't. I should have wrote it down. I don't remember what I was going to say. It'll come to me.
I wish we had had more time to talk about jokes, because I think that gets to the heart of the division between intention and perception or reception. So, you know, the intent of a joke is to make everyone laugh, right? It's humor, it's levity, it's joy. Just like the intent of a compliment is to edify. But if the premise on which those intentions are built is something which necessitates the denigration of a class or a person or a group of people, then it doesn't really matter what your intention is. It doesn't matter if your economy, you know, is built on the backs of slaves, then that's right. I mean, sort of the same thing in a very different way. I mean, and I mean, God, I've told a lot of poorly constructed jokes.
Yeah, I had a experience, and this was back when I was, I don't know, third, fourth grade. No, it's older than that, but young, grade school. And, you know, I heard jokes at school, and if you don't know me, I'm a very sarcastic. Humor is not only my defense mechanism, but just the mechanism I operate on a normal basis. And I heard some racist jokes, and for some reason I thought that I should tell them to my mother, of all people. And my friend was still with me at the time that I told her, and so she just kind of put on a face and was like, "Ah, so funny." And then afterwards, I don't know if I think I've told Jackie this before, but afterwards, she called me in, and it was time to be the parent. And she was like, "Hey, those jokes, those really funny jokes you told me earlier, we're going to call up Freddie, and you're going to tell him those jokes and see if he laughs at them." I didn't want to do that at all. And so that very clearly was one of the first times I was called out on this issue and had to think about it as not a kid anymore and had to be responsible. And it was a big wake-up call, because I could not imagine, I didn't want to tell those jokes to Freddie. And that's like, I think about that a lot.
So you didn't call him?
No. Freddie was not a man I ever wanted to upset.
My friends feel that way.
But part of that was you got to have people that have that kind of weight in your life. And I think a big problem with racism in general is it's such a divided problem that most people that are doing it and intentionally doing it don't have that connection to think about, to weigh the consequences, or lose that relationship because of their actions or their words. And so that's one of the biggest hurdles for me, is like, how do you get that point across to someone that doesn't have a Freddie, you know?
Well, and I'm not sure if you guys would agree, or maybe it's anecdotal and not across the board, but I think oftentimes the jokes that we're talking about are really just kind of clothed in the truth that they want to get to, right? It's testing the water, and it's a defensive mechanism. When they see that there is outrage, or they see that that's not acceptable, then we revert back to, hey, it's just humor. I'm just trying to tell a joke here. But I think oftentimes it's testing the water. And, you know, I don't want to apply sinister intent, but I think if it's not nipped right at the beginning, when, you know, it is in joke form, then I think that can devolve that relationship really quickly.
Yeah, the other day, Noah made a comment about, no, I'm not going to out you, Jeffrey, you're safe for now. Noah made a comment in a group. We were on a Zoom call, and he was, they were arguing about if water was wet. And he was like, well, if you don't think this, then you need therapy. And Jeffrey and I both were like, no, that's not, and so the next time I was home and I was talking to Noah, I said, I want to talk to you about this comment that you made. Like, I know you think it was funny, but this is what's happening when you say something like that. This is what you're telling someone like, and then I, gave him an example of somebody that was in the call with us who attends therapy, right? And so that he kind of see that you very quickly go from being dancing right at the line to taking a 50-foot leap across the line and totally making it inappropriate. So starts young.
Blake, you mentioned a really important thing that I want to make sure to circle back around to, and that was that you said you use humor as a defense mechanism. And so this is how I use sarcasm, right? And what I have come to have to face and own is that what I am defending often is some position of privilege. What I am perceiving and therefore pushing back on is a threat against my position as a male, my position as a white person. I mean, I don't conscientize this, but right, it's my position of respect and power within the structure. I am going to look foolish. And so that challenges my privilege, and I have to push back against that by using sarcasm as a defense mechanism. And so, there's another intersectionality of privilege and microaggression that are used to build one another up and keep the status quo in place. So that I look like the smartest, most powerful person in the room.
Yep.
Minh, did you look like maybe you were raising your hand again?
Yeah, sorry. But what Jeff and Blake were saying too about I think we almost need two different terms, right? We have microaggressions. I think microaggressions are almost when I think the people don't mean to be racist, right? I think sometimes what Jeff is saying, there's got to be another term for it. It's macroaggressions, or I guess there's this nuance to there's two different ways of handling something like a microaggression, because it's either like if a friend of mine says something I know and I trust, we have goodwill, and they say something that's really hurtful, but they don't mean it, right? You can have that conversation. What Jeff was saying earlier is like, especially in a place like Facebook or Twitter, where you can be kind of anonymous and really say something terrible, just outright terrible, and then fall back on it's a joke. It's almost like that's two different things. You can't even categorize them as the same thing, right? And same thing with what Jeffrey said with sarcasm. I think that's the hard thing about these conversations, is because there's so much nuance to it. It's hard to label it just all as microaggressive or all as this or that. So that's the hardest thing we have right now, and I think a lot of people struggle with it because it's not consistent, but it's not supposed to be consistent. There's lots of nuance, it's so situational, right? So, I don't know the answer to it, but I think there's different categories.
And look what's being modeled by leadership on Twitter. Kids are being shown that that's acceptable, and you can actually, not only is it acceptable, you can be the freaking president when you talk like that. And not to get political, but that's another thing that just, I feel like we fall back down the ladder that we were progressing up. And It's a daunting task.
And Blake, we've seen time and time again where something outrageous will be said, and the PR support team will resort back to this, right? That it was a joke. Now, oftentimes he comes back and corrects it, but this is something we see all the way down from the White House. It was a joke. But I've been struggling watching the A&M statue kind of conversation this week. I don't know if we have any Aggies on the call. It's not me, but their president at one point solely has Confederate ties and was a general, and there's a tradition of putting pennies, and whether that means he looks down on Lincoln, and there's been kind of a protest, and there have been Aggies that have shown up in their 50s and 60s and 70s who are trying to speak to this tradition, and they're putting themselves, their physical body, in between a crowd that's calling for justice to protect the statue. And I've tried to think, what is it that is convicting these individuals enough to leave their home, drive out to A&M campus, put their physical body between this statue and a crowd that's I think, in my opinion, calling for justice. And I think it's kind of what Jeffrey was talking about, of that it is the fact that they've participated in that tradition has been, it is more difficult to admit that might be part of their privilege, that might have been contributing to systemic racism, than it is to listen to all of the individuals that are having this experience. They would rather just go stand and be angry and be a physical barrier than listen and do introspection. And so that's something I've just kind of been watching at a distance and trying to understand this week.
Yeah, I think this is not our particular topic for this week, but it's good to, I think, sort of keep reviewing terms. And one of the things we've talked about in the previous conversation is the distinction between systemic and systematic, and the difference between racism and a racist. So one, in general, now that's not to say that all of these don't exist, but in general, what we're talking about is systemic racism. So we're not accusing any individual per se of being a racist. We're talking about something that is systematic and built into the fabric of the way things work. That's racism. We can have racism and not actually have anyone practicing over as being an overt racist. And that's what these conversations are about, is all that stuff below the surface that keeps the system going. The second is the distinction between systemic and systematic. Systematic is a strategy that's deployed throughout a system in order to intentionally achieve a particular end. Systemic is something that simply pervades the system. Could be intentional or not, right? But it's simply pervasive. And what we're saying is we're not laying intention on anyone when we talk about systemic racism. Now, that's not to say there aren't people out there who have intention. But when we talk about systemic racism, we're not pointing a finger at you as an individual. We're saying this is something that we all need to grapple with because it's in the water, right? It's in the system. And we've been drinking it for so long, we don't see or taste it anymore, so to speak. Stretching this metaphor too far, I should stop it.
So Jeffrey, are you, so kind of per our discussion, so you're saying like the microaggressions and the it's just a joke is systemic or systematic? It's systemic, right? It's just, it's in the system. Is that what you're saying?
I would say it's systemic. And I would, because again, I go back to the matter of me intention. When the intention becomes malicious, then it moves over into being systematic. Does that make sense?
Right. So jokes could be systematic if the person who's telling it, their intention is to tell a black joke or to, tell a LGBT joke. Like the purpose is really to degrade the other.
We're gonna test the waters, like Jeff said. Like, can I tell a joke and see if I get away with it? What kind of people am I around right now?
Yeah, I would say that's systematic,
right?
Because it's intentional. And I think that borders on a macroaggression, not a microaggression.
Yeah, I'm always like, it's a not so microaggression.
I'm not sure.
That's kind of what I was saying earlier. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not sure what we witness on Twitter a lot is microaggression.
I think it's just aggression.
I think it's just aggression.
I don't think it needs a.
Again, to me, a microaggression is me saying, Jackie, you have such beautiful skin. Now, I intend that to be a compliment to Jackie, but it's built on premises which normalize whiteness and denigrate blackness, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I will never comment on your skin.
Well, I think like one of the things is, it'll often say, well, like, and Jackie, you said you had heard this before, like, well, you speak so well for a black girl or a black person.
I don't think you even need to add for a black person.
But that's a very common microaggression, like not so microaggression, right? But then when you say, oh, but you're so articulate, because women aren't usually, black women aren't usually, like, what exactly is
what do you mean? Yeah.
But what do you guys think when it's, I'm gonna be careful here because I don't want to be microaggressive, but when it's positive, like somebody will say, yeah, what if it's something like somebody was saying, like somebody said to me, there's like a bunch of Vietnamese were sitting there with a white friend, and we were talking about our ages, right? Like how old we were, and they're like, wow, Asian people don't age, and it's and they said it kind of funny, like Asians don't raise it or something. It was some kind of funny rhyme, kind of like black don't crack, right? When it talks about different ages for African American people or black people, and it was just interesting because that's almost 100% positive, right? There's no microaggression to it, but it's funny where my cousin you can see her kind of just go back. It's like she almost had to process the whole information in her mind because I guess she's so used to microaggressions that even something that might be 100% complimentary might not be. So there's a part of it that's a little worrisome too, that I think it's good to tiptoe. I don't think it's a bad thing. So you find it, like you said, a safe space. I think that's okay when you're with people. I think you respect and things like that. That's good. But it was an interesting conversation we had, and just watching the different reactions of people. I was curious if you guys had any opinions on that.
Oh yeah, I've definitely heard the black don't crack. I mean, I've even said it too myself, and people always ask me, oh, how old are you? And I'll tell them, and they're like, oh, you don't look that old. And so at those times, like, I mean, they don't say the black don't crack, but when they're like, oh, you don't look like you're that old, I don't usually take that as a microaggression. I'm just like, I don't know, I got good genes. I don't know.
I look good and I know it.
But I mean, I understand what you're saying, where it's just kind of like, they might really just be trying to give you a compliment and not trying to have some little mean intent behind it. So it can get a little bit kind of gray area trying to figure out, are you really complimenting? Are you trying to say something backhanded to me? Those times I've talked about before, it's like, well, I'm just going to let it go, instead of trying to figure out what's all going on behind your head with what you just came out of your mouth. So yeah, it's kind of a fine line.
And it is a spectrum, right? Like my wife and I have kind of a running game as we watch sports because there's a lot of microaggressions that come out of the sports commentators' mouths. And a lot of it is, I think, particular to this conversation, but to Minh's point, there can be people who are trying to give a compliment, right? When we talk about black athletes, oftentimes it's that person is a great athlete. They got God-given gifts, right? And they talk about just athletic ability. And then when they are speaking to white athletes, it is that person studies. That person's always in the film room. that person just is the hardest working, first in, last out, right? And all of it seems complimentary. But when you look at how they talk about both types of athletes over time, it is speaking to a level of prejudice there, even though at that particular moment, that one comment seems like a compliment.
Yeah, I was seeing lots of stuff when they were doing the draft, the NFL draft,
Oh, boy, yeah.
and there was lots of comments about how they would describe the Black athletes and the words that they would put beside their picture, all these things they have overcome, you know, and have made it to the draft, and then the things that they would say next to the white athletes, and like just showing everything. It's like those really are, I don't know, maybe more macroaggressions than microaggressions, but it's like, why can you not say that this Black athlete graduated college or, you know, did this? Like, why do you always have to say that they had a single parent or they went through all these troubles and have made it here? But that's what it is oftentimes.
The white athlete's status is built on accomplishment, right? Which is attributed to the individual. The Black athlete status is based on gift, which is attributed to God, right?
But they're not
So-
capable of it. Yeah.
Yeah.
They
so-
were put here to play sport. They have no other value.
Well, they have no agency. They had no agency in getting to where they are. God was the one who, whereas the
Right.
white person has all the agency, right? I worked hard. I was first in, last out. Blah, 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 blah. So it's a way of subtly robbing individuals of agency.
Well, and it happens. It doesn't just
And
happen
it's
in race conversations. It happens in gender conversations, and I mean lots of different sexuality conversations. Minh, what were you about to say?
well, no, I think you exactly what different you were saying too. A lot of different conversations because when my daughter graduated at boutique last year, the valedictorian and salutatorian was a Hispanic female, and the salutatorian was an African American female. And I remember my family saying, "Where are all the Asians? Right? What happened? Right?" And it's like it's just kind of like what you said. It's like these two girls probably studied their asses off. I mean, how do you not see this could be a possibility? It was just something that was assumed, and it's something being Asian that we're the model minority. We've always been the model minority, right? From the last 20 years, where why can't you? It's so frustrating, especially right now with the Black Lives Matter movement, in that Blacks have always been allies to Asians. I think back when we first came over, they've always been the allies, but it's not being reciprocated. Is that the right word? Right now, and it's something that's the younger generation feels it more than the older generation, where they just assumed they put their head in, they worked, and they made it. So why can't everybody make it? And that's something that I hear a lot in microaggressions and macroaggressions, where just like in the greater society, there's a lot more interracial marriage now with Asians and African Americans, Asians, Hispanic. It's a lot more interracial marriage than there was in my generation, certainly not my parents' generation. And I think that's one thing that's changing conversations a lot too.
Well, and Minh, I would say just
I
even
think that's a good thing. But it's great what you guys are saying.
I would just add that even the positive seeming stereotypes of Asians are smart or Asians are good at math or whatever it is, that they can be dangerous in and of themselves just because it begins to build that rationale that actions or tendencies are genetic, right? And it takes away the agency, and it's not attributable to that individual, but it's attributable to their skin color, right? Yeah.
Well, and like anything else, it's generalizations, which we know don't work. Yeah.
I think one of the most important things that has come up, or sort of underlined a lot of our observations and comments, is that it's about relationship. All of this has to be borne out and brought to fruition in relationship. If I have a relationship with someone, I am able to judge whether, as Jackie said, they're truly trying to compliment me for who I am as I am, created in the image of God, or if they are unintentionally complimenting me against a racial stereotype. It's in relationship that we will be able, to address these things with others. It's hard to do that at the subway because you don't have a relationship with that person, right? It's with the people in whom with whom we have a relationship that we can sit down and say, hey, I'm not sure you understood this is how this might be perceived, or this is how I received it, or this is the premise behind what you said. That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Just conversations.
Oh, yeah.
I thought it might be fun to create a document of like, what do you say when? And then we fill in the blank, like, what do you say when you're at Subway and the guy comes, whatever.
Seriously, like, yeah, I wish, like,
Choose
not
your own
that you
adventure.
create a scene, but you just want to say something that lets him know, like, dude, what an absurd assumption that you just made that somehow convinced you to be comfortable enough with me without knowing me to say this. Because now he's going to do it to the next white guy that walks in. He'll say the same thing because I didn't speak up or tell him, not berate him, but tell him, like, not an appropriate comment, dude.
I don't know.
I guess I'm not going to fix all the world's problems with one interaction, but
right.
At least maybe he would think before he just started vomiting out his mouth. Stupid, ignorant crap.
Yeah, I feel like something, and I don't know, I mean, maybe somebody else might have something else to add, but like, I guess maybe something you could have done was framing it in a way of, well, I actually thought it was kind of weird to be asked. I mean, I'm a white guy, and I thought it was weird, right? Like, so you make it more like trying to say, actually, it has nothing to do with the fact that this is a Black neighborhood or this is whatever, right? And actually has more of the fact that this is a Subway and we don't tip at Subway, right? Or whatever, to help kind of reframe in a way that gets away from that generalization.
Yeah.
Basically.
Heather, one experience I had, and it didn't solve race relations or anything, but it made me feel better, was during constituent casework. I would have someone call or email me about a problem they were having with their neighbor. Doesn't know the yard, is out track, whatever it is. And oftentimes they would throw in the ethnicity of the neighbor, right? And every time when I would ask, why did you tell me the ethnicity? And then just leave space.
Yeah.
Just be quiet and let that awkwardness just wash over all of us. I feel like that made me feel better. I don't know if it made any introspection happen, but it was cathartic for me.
Well, I will say to that, Jeff, one thing that I will tip my cap to Teddy Fulenwider on is anytime we came home from school or told a story or anything, and we said, oh, and this Black kid, she would always say, does it affect the story that they're Black? And I'd say, we'd just laugh, or, but now, and my sisters will say the same thing. Like, now we think about that because we were parented that way. And you find yourself, and especially as kids, it's, it's mostly innocent, but no, it didn't matter that they were Black. For some reason, that felt like a important fact in the story, but it had no bearing in what happened or what's talked about. So that's a very good point, and something I will take into my parenting.
Yeah. Are we done? All right. Well, we've been chatting for almost 30 minutes backstage. So this has been good. This has been really quite fun. And I hope that it'll be helpful for people to listen to later this week when we post it. We really appreciate all of you time. We appreciate being able to see the tiny head of Jeff's baby. There, yay! I kept seeing his arm, like, but we are grateful for the time each of you took and the vulnerability and honesty that you brought to the table today. We hope and pray that it will help our community, not just of St. Stephen, but those that we share this with and those who happen upon our pages, help them in their own journey toward being an anti-racist, because I think that's kind of where we are all trying to get in our journeys. So we hope that you all have a wonderful week, and we will see you soon.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Bye. Thanks, guys.